You know, a lot of people would say, why put a compilation out at all? Why put an anthology out? You buy yourself some space and time to work on your next record the way you want to work on it. And in a sort of like another sense as well, it kind of gave the opportunity to put out Live With Me and the other track False Flags, because those two tracks had already been written and were sitting on a shelf. And they may have sat on a shelf for another year because we weren't sure, and we're still not sure how the next record's going to sound. It's going off in so many directions at the moment. We're not sure how to pin it down or what it's going to end up being. And these tracks might have just gathered dust. And I mean, Live With Me was initially a sort of a soundtrack piece that myself and Neil Davidge were working on for a film, a British independent film, which had a jazz blues kind of theme going through it, hence us getting in contact with Terry Callier. And it was interesting for us to work on something like that after 100th Window and after Danny the Dog and Bullet Boy, because it was a totally different sort of type of sound and a different reference. You know, we hadn't been there for a while. And, you know, Terry came to the studio, we did some stuff on the piano, you know, we wrote some tracks, we developed them, we sent them to Terry, he came to the studio, and it happened very quickly. And then the film didn't happen, you know, the film hasn't gone into production, so the tracks went on the shelf, you know, they sat there. And likewise, the False Flags track was written around the time of the riots in France. And it was, you know, it was very much influenced by that whole period of time. And that again sat on the shelf, and it might have felt, you know, not so relevant 2 years later or a year later. So as well as the idea of buying ourselves space and time, we had the opportunity to put two tracks out now. And that kind of grew into the idea of this too. Well, let's include demos and things people haven't heard before. In that way, you have a set of tracks that people know, or most people know, or maybe a few people know, whatever. But you've also got a lot of things that people haven't heard, and you've got tracks which probably highlight and describe the way you write, things that took a direction left or took a direction right. You know what I mean? Some tracks you make a choice on the day in the studio, the final day, and it could have gone the other way. And this way, you're showing sort of tracks in that light. You're showing how they develop, how they sort of like start, and in a way, just putting out rough things. You're exposing yourself, and it's quite nice just doing that, putting out things that people might pull apart and go, well, that's rubbish, you know. I mean, on the track Silent Spring, with you know, working with Elizabeth on that, that's an unfinished piece of material which we may never finish. And we were both really pleased that she was kind of into letting us put that out there. And we did a bit of mix work on it to sonically sort of lift it, but it is a demo, and it has a sort of new language. It doesn't even have lyrics really, but it's very beautiful, and it felt like it had just a really beautiful sense of being, you know. And that's kind of brave of her to let us do that. And it was kind of a follow-on from the approach of the two tracks, you know, which are the two newest pieces, because they were very much instantly recorded, done acoustically, vocally, and then a bit of skullduggery in the studio afterwards, and a bit of arrangement. But they weren't laboured over intensively. They weren't sort of, the way we approached 100th Window was in you know, very small increments, you know, intricacy and layers and all that sort of stuff, which was about the time then, that was what it was about. But this was very different. It was the opposite sort of sensation. Live With Me, going in a jazz blues direction, was kind of guided by what was happening at the time, and also it was a response of, you know, we worked so kind of coldly in such absenteeist ways on 100th Window when there was no one around. Let's do something more open and collaborative and quick and simple and organic, and this is the net result of it. But yeah, accidentally it finds itself, you know, winning people's hearts and minds, you know, which is quite bizarre.
In some respects, it's been called a return to form, so I've been told. Which is a bit bizarre.
Which is a bit disturbing, because it means you've been out of form for years. We all had a kind of a common interest in what was melancholic and sad in music and beautiful, and the thing that the blues was about. And if it reflects the stuff that's going around in the times, in your personal life, on the news or whatever, you feel like, you know, you immerse yourself in it, you wallow in it, and then you get over it, you know, that kind of thing. And obviously, you know, things have got a lot darker recently, and I think we've always been accused of brooding, like you said, on sort of, and dwelling maybe on the darker sides. But it's that kind of thing that, you know, to me, like blues and sad music and things that reflect what's going on around you are actually uplifting. Like I said, they actually give you sort of like an energy, because if there's shit going on in the news and there's stuff happening, and then I turn over and there's a 3-minute kind of light-hearted sort of like jingle, then I find that really dark, because I'm like, well, that's not what's going on out there. That's not real. That's scary, because that's distraction, and that doesn't make sense. You know, that's trying to keep everyone's eyes away from reality, and I find that really dark personally. I think sort of blues music and sad music, I find it's actually something which connects you to what's really happening. Because it's so difficult in an information age as it is now, where you're bombarded, to actually really connect with anything. And I like the fact that our forum on our website is politicised and informed, and even at a much younger generation, they know what's going on out there. You know, I think that's really important. I don't think we see ourselves as celebrities, though. The band has a fame, you know what I mean, and the music has a reputation, that sort of stuff. But as individuals, it's not been. We've never become celebrities on that level. It's been much more grounded. Bristol's a much more grounded place, and we go back home and no one really cares, and that's good. But there is an individual, you know, as people, an obligation to want to be involved, you know, and to sort of take position, and actually sort of like have an effect, and use a bit of the forum we have to kind of like express concern and sort of like, and also work with other groups, particularly like Amnesty and Greenpeace and CND and Stop the War, you know, to name but a few, to actually work alongside them rather than trying to create some kind of myth about us being sort of like politicised figures. You know, we're just musicians and people, and we'll work alongside organisations to sort of try and do things we feel that are important. And then at the same time, you've got to strike a balance between communicating music and escapism as well as reality. The fact that both our first album and our last album were framed by the two Gulf Wars and the continuing sort of like problems with the Middle East as something that has just continued to be, you know, we've been intertwined with all the way through, and something we felt very strongly about being British. And the whole point of the demonstration against the war wasn't that we were naive enough to think we could stop the war. It's just a personal obligation, I think. It's more than an obligation as a band or a celebrity. It was really sad, because you're talking about like relationships that go back like 18 years, you know, or probably 15, 18 years. It was really difficult. It was like very traumatic for everyone. Everyone felt, you know, it's just a real moment of stress. It was a nasty period of time, and it ends up becoming legal, and it becomes less personal and more mechanical, and which is a really bad way to end anything. You know what I mean? There's no real kind of closure on it, which you can identify as a human being, as a friend, as an ally to someone. Which is why it'd be great to think that there's a possible future chance to sort of get back in and resolve issues and make amends and be friends, you know. And everything's changed so much since then. I'd love to see what the net result of that would be, you know, musically, because we were in a completely different space then, you know, in terms of our personalities, our who we were, what we represented, what our values were. All that's changed. It'd be interesting.